Kellan Briggs leaned against the hood of his matte black Range Rover, staring at the cracked wooden farm sign that read Pine Creek Farm. The last thing he expected when agreeing to a last-minute visit to his late uncle's property was to be swallowed by the scent of fresh hay, the sound of chickens clucking, and a sky so wide it made the city feel like a cage. He pulled off his sunglasses and muttered, "What the hell am I doing here?" The wind kicked up dust as a red pickup drove past and stopped short in front of the barn. A woman jumped down from the driver's side, boots hitting the gravel. She wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt tied at the waist, and a long braid that swung down her back. She didn't glance at him. She didn't even slow down. "Hey!" he called out. She paused, turned, and raised an eyebrow. "You lost. I own this place," he said, pushing off the car with a confident stride. "Well, technically, I'm Kellan Briggs." Her expression didn't twitch. "Good for you. I was told someone's managing it." "You, Gwen Parks," she said, walking toward the barn. "Been running it for the past 2 years. Since your uncle got sick." He followed. "So, what, you're the farmer's daughter?" "I'm the farmer's granddaughter," she said, glancing back at him. "And if you're here to sell it or bulldoze it into another resort for your rich friends, let me stop you right now." Kellan blinked. "I'm not bulldozing anything." She stopped at the barn door and turned to face him fully. Her eyes were sharp, green, and piercing. "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. Truthfully, he didn't know. His life full of boardroom deals, luxury penthouses, and models who couldn't remember his name had been spiraling into something that felt fake. When his uncle passed, the letter that came with the will said, "Maybe what you need isn't another deal. Maybe you need to feel something real." So here he was. "I came to see what he left behind," Kellan said. "That's all." Gwen studied him. "Then follow the rules. Don't touch the animals. Don't walk through the fields without boots. And don't get in my way." She vanished into the barn. Kellan stared after her, stunned. No one ever talked to him like that. He liked it. By sunset, he'd been chased by a goat, stepped in something he refused to identify, and nearly tripped over a rake. "You're not exactly made for dirt," Gwen said, watching him from the porch swing as he wiped his boots. "I'm adapting," he replied, collapsing onto the steps. "You're not staying in town?" "I figured I'd stay here a few nights." Gwen raised an eyebrow. "You?" In the guest room with no AC, a wasp nest outside the window, and one working outlet. He grinned. "Sounds like a spa weekend." She shook her head, but he caught the faintest tug of a smile at her lips. That night, Kellan lay in the creaky bed, staring at the ceiling. It was quiet. Too quiet. No horns. No city buzz. Just crickets and the occasional owl. And her voice. She'd told him about the farm, how she'd grown up here with her grandparents, how she'd stayed when most people left. She didn't say much, but when she did, it stuck. The next morning, he found her in the stables, brushing down a chestnut horse. "You ever take a break?" he asked. She handed him a brush. "You ever work with your hands?" He hesitated, took the brush, and started copying her movements. His strokes were uneven. She corrected him, her hand guiding his. Her touch was warm. His heart kicked. He cleared his throat. "Why'd you stay here, Gwen?" She shrugged. "Someone had to. My grandpa built this from nothing. I couldn't let it die. That's loyal. Not many people would do that. I'm not most people." He looked at her. "Yeah, I noticed." Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. He helped feed the chickens. She taught him how to milk a cow badly. He watched her laugh for the first time when he got chased by the rooster. It was a full, unguarded laugh, and it made something twist in his chest. He hadn't laughed like that in years. One evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the fields, he asked, "What would you do if you didn't have the farm?" She didn't answer right away. "I don't know. I've never let myself think about it. This place. It's home." He nodded. "I don't really have one of those." She looked at him, her gaze softer than before. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong places." Gwen didn't mean to like him. At first, he was everything she hated, entitled, polished, out of place. But then she saw him sweat, get dirty, and keep showing up. He didn't complain when the tractor broke down and he had to help push it. He didn't flinch when she snapped at him. He listened. He looked at her like she mattered. And when he laughed, it lit her up in a way she didn't expect. On the 7th day, he made her dinner. Not well. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce was from a jar, and the garlic bread burned. but he set the table with candles and wildflowers he'd picked himself. She walked in, eyebrows raised. "What's this?" Thank you," he said, "for not kicking me off the farm." She sat down slowly. "You cooked." "I attempted." She took a bite and coughed. "You tried. I'll give you that." He laughed. "Okay, so no master chef future for me." She smiled and her eyes lingered on him. "You're not what I expected, Kellan Briggs. Neither are you, Gwen Parks." After dinner, they sat on the porch. The stars were out brighter than he'd ever seen. "You ever miss the city?" she asked. "Sometimes. But lately." He glanced at her. "It feels like the noise stopped mattering." She looked at him, really looked. "Why did you really come here?" He exhaled. "I lost track of who I was. My company grew fast. I made my first million at 23. I was everywhere, doing everything, with everyone. Then one night I stood in my penthouse and realized I didn't know a damn person who cared about me. Not really." Gwen's voice was soft. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now. I care about someone." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. The air between them tightened, charged. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the way her fingers had curled around his. The way she looked at him like she saw through everything. The farm was supposed to be a quick visit. A formality. But now he didn't know how to leave. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to. Kellan stood at the edge of the cornfield, shielding his eyes against the afternoon sun as he watched Gwen wrestle a broken fence panel into place. She didn't ask for help. She never did. But he stepped forward anyway, grabbing the other end without a word. The silence stretched comfortably between them as they worked, wood splintered beneath their hands. Her brow furrowed in concentration. When the last nail was hammered in, she finally looked over. "You could have just let me handle it," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans. "I didn't want to," he replied simply. She hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." They walked back toward the house in silence, their boots crunching over dry grass. A hawk circled overhead. Somewhere across the field, the windmill creaked softly. Inside the house, the kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and old pine. Gwen grabbed 2 glasses from the cupboard and filled them from the pitcher in the fridge. She handed one to him, then leaned against the counter. "You ever fix a fence before?" "No," he said, taking a drink. "But it's not that different from managing a team. You just figure out where everything's weak and reinforce it." She gave him a long look. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're still in a meeting." His laugh was quiet. "Maybe I don't know how to turn it off." "Then maybe you need to learn." She didn't say it unkindly. In fact, it was the gentlest thing she'd said all day. He glanced around the kitchen. "So what happens to this place come winter?" "We patch the roof before the snow hits, insulate the chicken coops, stock the pantry. Things slow down, but they don't stop." "Ever think about leaving?" "Once," she said, her eyes falling to the floor. "A long time ago, but something always pulled me back." He didn't press her. He just took another sip and let the silence do the asking. "I was engaged once," she added after a pause. "He wanted to move to Chicago. Said the farm was holding me back." Kellan's grip on the glass tightened slightly. "What happened?" "I let him go," she said. "Didn't realize until after how much of myself I'd have lost if I'd gone with him." He set the glass down slowly. "You ever wonder if you made the wrong choice?" "No," she said, looking directly at him. "Not for a second." Later that afternoon, Kellan disappeared into the barn and didn't re-emerge for nearly 2 hours. When he finally did, Gwen found him standing in the middle of the pasture with a battered notebook in hand. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the frayed edges. "My uncle's," he replied, flipping through the pages. "I found it behind a pile of old feed buckets. Looks like he kept notes on everything. Crop cycles, breeding schedules, even weather patterns." She stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. "I didn't know he kept records like that." "There's more," Kellan said, turning to the last few pages. "He mentioned you. Said you were the reason he held on so long. That you reminded him why he started it all." She blinked once, then looked away. "He never told me that. I think he wanted you to find it when you were ready." Gwen nodded slowly. "He always did believe in leaving things to time." As the sky darkened with the onset of evening, they drove into town. Kellan insisted on taking her out to dinner. "A small thank you," he said, "for everything." The local steakhouse was tucked between a hardware store and a florist, its walls lined with black and white photos of county fairs and dusty rodeos. Gwen slid into the booth across from him, her hair still damp from a quick shower, her boots polished clean for once. "You clean up all right," he teased. She raised an eyebrow. "So do you. Still wearing those ridiculous watches?" He glanced down at the platinum timepiece on his wrist. "Force of habit." They ordered and the conversation drifted. She told him about her childhood, how her mother had left when she was 8, how her grandfather taught her to drive a tractor before she could ride a bike. He listened genuinely without interrupting. "You're not what I expected either," she said after a while, folding her napkin. "I thought you'd stay for 2 days, maybe 3, complain about the heat, then disappear back into your penthouse." "I almost did," he admitted. "But then you told me not to get in your way, and I realized I didn't want to leave until you told me I could." She laughed, and he watched the way her defenses softened in that moment, like the walls she always kept up had finally cracked under the weight of something real. When the check came, he pulled out a card without looking at the total. She noticed. "You always throw money around like that?" He slid the card back into his wallet. "Only when it matters." They stepped out into the warm night air, the streetlights casting golden halos on the sidewalk. Gwen paused beside his car. "You didn't have to come here, you know," she said, voice quieter now. "You could have sold the place from a distance. Hired someone to handle everything." "I know. Then why didn't you?" He looked at her, the answer already clear in his mind. "Because I needed to understand what he was trying to protect." She nodded once, then climbed into the passenger seat without another word. The next morning, the rhythm shifted. Gwen found Kellan in the hayloft, sitting cross-legged with the notebook open beside him and a calculator in hand. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. "Your fertilizer costs are higher than they should be. There's a supplier 2 counties over offering bulk rates at half the price." She tilted her head. "You're doing inventory?" "I'm trying to figure out how to keep this place running for the next 10 years. She stared at him. "You're not planning to leave, are you?" He didn't answer right away. "I haven't made a decision, but I know I don't want to make it without you." Her breath caught. "I've been thinking about something," he added, standing. "There's an old grain silo on the back edge of the property. What if we converted it into a guest house? Rent it out for weekend stays. Farm experiences. People from the city pay stupid money to milk a goat. You want to turn the farm into a business?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "I want to make sure it survives. With you." She didn't respond. Not yet. But her eyes didn't leave his. That evening, a storm rolled in fast and hard. Thunder cracked over the fields as the wind howled through the trees. Gwen raced outside to secure the animals. Kellan was already out there, soaked to the skin, hauling the last of the feed bins into the shed. Rain lashed them from all sides. Lightning split the sky. When the last gate was locked and the final tarp secured, they stumbled into the barn, dripping and breathless. She turned to him, hair plastered to her cheeks, and said, "You didn't have to help." "I know," he said, "but you didn't ask me to stop either." Their eyes locked in the flickering light. Everything between them crashed forward like the storm outside. "You scare me sometimes," she whispered, "because I don't know what happens when you leave." "I don't either," he said, "but I know what happens if I stay." And then he kissed her. Not tentative, not questioning, certain. Certain in a way that made her grab the front of his shirt and pull him closer. Certain in a way that made the storm outside fade into nothing but a heartbeat between them. When they finally broke apart, she was the first to speak. "If you stay, this doesn't get to be temporary." "I'm not looking for temporary," he said. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Outside, the wind quieted. Inside, something had finally begun. The morning after the storm, the air smelled like wet earth and renewal. Gwen kicked open the barn doors, boots sinking slightly into the mud, her braid frizzing at the ends from the leftover humidity. Inside, the animals were restless but unharmed. Everything was where it should be except her equilibrium. She hadn't gotten more than a handful of hours of sleep. Not after that kiss. Not after the way Kellan had looked at her like he wasn't just staying for the farm, but for her. She found him in the workshop, sleeves rolled, hands blackened with oil. He was bent over the old tractor, examining the engine with a narrowed gaze. "You're up early," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Didn't sleep much, he muttered, tightening a bolt. This thing's a disaster. But I like a challenge. You sure you know what you're doing? I rebuilt a Ducati engine when I was 18. This is just louder and rustier. She watched him for a moment, then walked in and grabbed a wrench from the pegboard. You're missing a seal on the fuel line. It's been patched with duct tape. He glanced up. You know engines? My grandfather made me rebuild the lawnmower when I was 13 before I could go to the county fair. He handed her the wrench. Then by all means lead. They worked side by side, the silence filled only with metal clinks and the occasional muttered curse. At one point, his hand brushed hers as they reached for the same bolt. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. When the engine finally coughed to life, sputtering and belching black smoke, they both stepped back, laughing. Still got it, she said, wiping her hands on a rag. You're full of surprises, Gwen Parks. So are you. Later that afternoon, Kellan disappeared into the attic. Gwen found him dragging down a dusty trunk, coughing as clouds of dust puffed into the air. What are you looking for? She asked. There's a photo I remember from my childhood. My uncle and I standing in front of the old barn. I want to find it. She moved beside him, brushing off cobwebs. He kept most of the family stuff in this trunk. You might get lucky. They spent the next hour sitting on the wooden floor, flipping through stacks of yellowed Polaroids and brittle letters. Kellan held up a photo of a boy with a gap-toothed grin holding a chicken upside down. That's me. I remember this day. I thought I was helping. You look like you're terrorizing the poor thing. He shook his head, smiling. I never thought I'd come back here. Never thought it would feel like something I'd want to hold on to. She looked at him, her voice quieter. You really mean to stay? I don't know what it looks like yet. But I know I don't want a life that doesn't include this place. Or you. Gwen hesitated. It's not easy, Kellan. This life. It's long days, hard work, and not a lot of cushion when things go wrong. I'm not afraid of hard work. She paused. And if it doesn't work out, then we figure it out. Together. She didn't respond, just picked up another photo and let the moment settle between them. That night, Gwen returned from checking the irrigation lines to find the porch lights glowing and something strange and wonderful in the air. Music. Faint, old jazz drifting from inside the house. She stepped through the front door slowly. Kellan stood in the living room in a crisp button-down shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, hair still damp from a shower. The furniture had been shifted, the coffee table pushed aside to make space. He extended a hand. Dance with me. She blinked. You're serious? Completely. She let him pull her in, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his settled at her waist. They swayed clumsily at first, boots scraping against the rug, her laugh slipping out before she could stop it. You're terrible at this, she said. I'm improvising. I can tell. But she didn't let go. The song played on, and somewhere between the stumble and the stillness, the dance changed. Slowed. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. His thumb brushed the small of her back. And for a few fragile seconds, the world outside the walls didn't exist. When the music faded, they didn't step apart. I never thought I'd find something like this, he said, voice low. Not here. Not anywhere. She looked up at him, her throat tight. You're not just saying that because the stars are out and the jazz is doing all the heavy lifting? No, he said. I'm saying that because I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm with you. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, she kissed him again. Slower this time. Certain. The next day, Gwen brought him to the edge of the property where the old orchard had gone wild. The trees were gnarled, branches tangled, fruit hanging small and sour from neglect. My grandfather planted these when I was a kid, she said. He had big plans for a cider business. Never got around to it. Kellan looked around. Why not bring it back? It would take time. Money. A lot of both. I have both, he said. And I think your grandfather would have wanted you to finish what he started. She studied him. You're not just trying to impress me, are you? No, he said. But if it does impress you, I won't complain. She laughed, shaking her head. You're impossible. Only mildly. They walked between the trees, her hand brushing his. When they reached the far end of the grove, he stopped. I want to show you something. She followed him back to the barn where he pulled a tarp off something large and unexpected, a gleaming black SUV. You bought a new car? No. I had it delivered from the city. It's mine. She raised an eyebrow. You had it sent here? I figured I'd need it if I was staying longer. And I wanted to take you somewhere. Where? You'll see. They drove for over an hour, winding through back roads and rolling hills. Eventually, they reached a hilltop clearing overlooking a quiet lake, the surface still and silver in the late afternoon sun. A blanket was spread on the grass, along with a basket and 2 glasses. You planned a picnic? I made a call, he said. Had it set up while you were in town. She looked at him, stunned. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? Not when it matters. They sat in the grass, eating fresh bread, strawberries, and soft cheese. Neither of them said much, and for once, it wasn't because they didn't have things to say, it was because they didn't need to fill the silence. As the sun dipped behind the trees, he reached into the basket and pulled out a small box. Her breath caught. I know it's fast, he said, opening it to reveal a ring, a simple band with a single, brilliant diamond that caught the last light of sunset. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She stared at him, speechless. I don't want to go back to the person I was before I met you. I don't want a life without this farm, without these muddy boots, without you. Gwen, marry me. She blinked once, twice, then nodded. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest as the lake shimmered behind them and the blanket crumpled beneath their knees. I thought I'd never leave this place, she whispered. You're not, he said. We're building something here, together. And in that moment, surrounded by trees and sky and everything that mattered, they knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The news traveled through Pine Creek faster than a brush fire in July. Gwen Parks was engaged. Not to some local boy, not to a rancher's son or a high school sweetheart, but to Kellan Briggs, the outsider, the suit, the millionaire who'd somehow ended up elbow-deep in manure and fixing fences like he'd been born to it. But Gwen didn't care about the whispers at the feed store or the long looks at the diner. She cared about the way Kellan's hand found hers without searching, how he never once tried to pull her away from the farm but instead dug his heels in beside her. Still, the engagement wasn't all lake picnics and candlelit dancing. There were real decisions to make now. Real steps to take. You're not going back to the city at all? She asked one morning as they walked the north field, her clipboard bouncing against her thigh with each step. I signed over control of the day-to-day operations last week, Kellan said, eyes scanning the soil. I'll still own the company, but I won't be sitting in meetings 12 hours a day. I've done that long enough. So you're stepping back. I'm stepping into something better. She stopped walking. And you're sure you won't miss it? The pace. The numbers. The power. He turned to face her fully. I thought those things made me successful. But they just made me busy. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached out and handed him the clipboard. Congratulations, she said. You're officially in charge of crop rotation planning for the West lot. He stared down at the spreadsheet. This is the part where you pretend to delegate and laugh while I mess it up, right? Nope, she said, already walking again. You're one of us now. Time to earn your keep. The next few days were full of planning, not just for the next season's planting, but for their future. They kept it simple, just like everything else they'd built together. No flashy guest lists or designer gowns, not yet. The ring on her finger already felt like a commitment deeper than anything money could buy. One afternoon, they drove into the city an hour away, not for any extravagant reason, but because Gwen needed a new pair of work boots and Kellan insisted on introducing her to something called real espresso. They sat at a sidewalk cafe, the sun warming the backs of their necks, surrounded by sounds that had once been Kellan's entire world. Honking taxis, polished heels on pavement, the buzz of conversations all layered over each other like a symphony of ambition. Gwen sipped the coffee and made a face. It tastes like burnt chocolate and regret. He laughed. That's the flavor profile. You're very sophisticated. She set the cup down, eyes scanning the tall buildings. It's different here. Everyone's moving so fast. That used to be me. Always chasing something. And now? He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. Now I know what it feels like to stop running. They visited a farm supply store before heading back, and on the way out, Gwen paused by a window display. It wasn't jewelry or clothes. It was a series of hand-carved wooden signs with sayings etched into them. She pointed to one. That's something my grandfather used to say. Kellan read it aloud. Grow slow, grow strong. I used to think it meant crops. Now I'm not so sure. He bought it without asking the price. That night, they hung it on the barn door. The next week, Kellan surprised her with a fully upgraded irrigation system for the south orchard. Not a gift, he said, an investment. But Gwen knew better. It was how he said I love you, not with words but with steady hands and follow-through. Trying to outdo me now, she asked, arms crossed as she watched the workers install the new lines. Trying to make sure you don't break your back hauling hoses for the next 20 years. She tilted her head. You planning on being around that long? He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Longer. Beneath the orchard trees, they talked about everything they hadn't yet. Children, what to do with the far corner of the property, whether or not they should buy the neighboring plot when old Mr. Haskins finally decided to retire. Would you want kids? Gwen asked suddenly, her voice quieter than before. Kellan didn't hesitate. If they're half as stubborn and strong as you? Absolutely. She looked down at her hands. I never thought I'd get here. I never thought I'd meet someone who didn't make me feel like I had to choose between love and the land. You don't, Kellan said. Not with me. By mid-autumn, the orchard was thriving. The cider press Gwen had once thought of as a pipe dream was now fully operational thanks to Kellan's connections and a few local grants he'd quietly secured without taking credit. He stood beside her as she handed a stranger their first bottle of Pine Creek Reserve, the label bearing her grandfather's name in elegant script. You did it, he said. We did it, she corrected. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the fields turned gold, Gwen sat on the porch swing, watching the chickens peck lazily at the grass. Kellan joined her, 2 mugs of cider in hand. I got a call today, he said, handing her one. From who? A friend from the city. Offered me a position on a tech board. Said it'd be remote, light commitment. Just a few hours a week. She looked at him carefully. Are you going to take it? I told him no. Why? Because for the first time, I'm building something that doesn't require a quarterly report or a press release. I'm building a life. She leaned against him, the swing creaking gently. You're not scared. I used to be, he said. But not anymore. Because you're not. Gwen didn't cry. She wasn't the type. But her throat tightened in a way that made it hard to speak. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled something out. What's that? He asked. She held up a tiny silver key. To the cider barn. Only 3 people have one. My grandfather had the first. I have the second. And now, you get the third. He took it slowly, curling his fingers around the cool metal. You're sure? I don't give keys lightly. He didn't say anything, just leaned over and kissed her temple. That winter, they sealed the orchard for the season, stored the last bottles, and prepped the land for spring. Snow fell in thick blankets across the fields, turning the whole world white and quiet. Inside the farmhouse, Gwen made soup while Kellan sorted through spreadsheets and seed catalogs. The radio played in the background, soft and slow, the kind of music that made time stretch. When she brought him a bowl, he looked up and smiled. This is home now, he said. She sat beside him, knees touching. It always was. That spring, Gwen wore a simple ivory dress and boots still dusted with soil. Kellan wore a blue shirt she'd picked out and a ring he'd never take off. They stood beneath the arbor her grandfather had built by hand, surrounded by fields they'd saved together, and said vows that needed no embellishment. Promises made in honesty, in dirt and sweat and second chances. Afterward, they danced under the stars, barefoot in the grass, cider in hand. The guests were few. Every one of them mattered. Later that night, Kellan carried Gwen over the threshold of the farmhouse. Not because tradition said he should, but because he couldn't imagine not doing it. He set her down gently, brushing her hair back from her face. You look at me like you still can't believe this is real, she said. I can't, he whispered. But I never want to wake up. Outside, the wind rustled the orchard trees. Inside, the fire crackled low. And in the center of it all stood a love that had grown slow, grown strong, and rooted itself in the unlikeliest soil. The heart of a farmer's daughter and the soul of a man who'd finally come home. The orchard bloomed slowly that spring, each delicate blossom like a promise made good on. Gwen stood at the edge of the rows, clipboard in hand, watching as the first honeybees buzzed between the early white flowers. The ground was still soft underfoot, the air not yet warm enough to shed her jacket, but she didn't mind the chill. Everything felt alive. From the barn came the sound of hammering, steady, rhythmic. Kellan had taken to carpentry with a surprising amount of precision. She found him bent over a half-finished wooden bench, sawdust clinging to his sleeves, pencil stuck behind his ear. "You're getting better," she said, stepping in to get a closer look. He glanced up. "I figured if I was going to keep crashing into your world, I might as well build a few things while I'm at it." She sat on the sawhorse across from him. "You've already built more than you know." He set the hammer down and crossed the space between them. "Say that again when I finish this without it collapsing under someone." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I've been thinking about adding a greenhouse, something small behind the east fence. It could extend our season by 2 months. Then we'll build it," he said. "Tell me what you need and I'll make it happen." She smiled, then pulled a folded pamphlet from her back pocket and handed it to him. "This company specializes in modular designs. They ship the frame and parts. We just assemble it." He opened it, flipping through the pages. "This is actually doable." "I know. Is this your way of asking for a spring project?" "It's my way of saying I want to grow more year-round. And not just apples." He looked up, his gaze steady. "I'm in. Whatever you want to plant, wherever you want to expand, I'm in." They spent the next few weeks preparing the land for the structure. Kellan handled the logistics, delivery trucks, permits, and foundation setting while Gwen drafted plans for crop rotation inside the greenhouse. They argued once, briefly, over the placement of the rainwater collection barrels. He wanted them closer to the south side, she insisted on the north to avoid shade cast on the seedlings. He conceded, but only after she proved it with last year's sun mapping notes. "You're a menace with charts," he said, shaking his head. "And you're stubborn with measurements," she replied. Later that night, he brought her a mug of tea and admitted she'd been right. She didn't gloat much. As the greenhouse took shape, so did the cider business. The first distributor reached out with a contract offer, not huge, but enough to place their bottles in specialty stores across 3 neighboring counties. Gwen read every clause twice, then handed it to Kellan. "I want your opinion," she said. He scanned it, brow furrowed. "They want too much of a margin. We can sell this ourselves, direct to consumer, and keep control. You think we can handle the volume? If we stagger production and reinvest, yes. But we'll need help. Local hires only," she said. "This business stays rooted here." He nodded. Agreed. They hired 2 seasonal workers, both attending the nearby agricultural college, and Gwen surprised herself by how easily she slipped into the role of mentor. Kellan handled the digital side, setting up a storefront, managing orders, and building a brand presence that, in his words, felt authentic without looking like it was curated by a goat. The orders came in steadily, then increased after a visiting food blogger posted an article about the orchard that love built. Gwen rolled her eyes at the headline but couldn't deny the effect. Within 2 days, they'd sold out of the reserve batch. Kellan stayed up until 2 in the morning printing new shipping labels. "You look like you've been through a harvest festival blindfolded," she said, walking in with a bowl of leftover stew. "I've faced investors worth $500 million and never felt this exhausted." She handed him the bowl. "Eat, then sleep. You're no good to me dead." He took it with a tired grin. "You say the most romantic things." By early summer, the greenhouse stood completed, a glistening glass structure nestled among the trees. Gwen filled it with heirloom tomatoes, peppers, and a test batch of strawberries. Kellan installed solar panels on the roof without her asking. She walked in one afternoon to find him adjusting the irrigation timers. "You think of everything." "I just pay attention," he said. "It's not hard when I care." And she believed him. One night, as fireflies danced along the edge of the orchard, they hosted a small dinner under the stars. A long wooden table, built by Kellan's hands, stretched beneath strings of lights. Friends from town, neighbors, and the students they'd hired all gathered. After the meal, Gwen stood and raised her glass. "I used to think I had to do everything alone," she said. "That this farm was mine to carry and mine alone. But I've learned that building something real means sharing the weight and the joy. So thank you for being part of this." Kellan reached beneath the table and took her hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The next morning, they received a letter addressed to Gwen. Handwritten. The return address was from her mother. She stared at it for a long while before opening it. "Do you want me to give you space?" Kellan asked. "No," she said. "Stay." The letter wasn't long. It didn't ask for forgiveness or offer excuses. It simply said she'd heard about the orchard, the cider, and the engagement. That she was proud, and that if Gwen ever wanted to talk, she'd be ready. Gwen folded it neatly. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything," Kellan said. "Not until you want to." She nodded, then tucked the letter into a drawer. Maybe someday. One afternoon in late June, Kellan took her to the edge of the orchard, where a small clearing overlooked the rolling hills. He'd cleared the brambles, laid stones, and planted lavender along the border. "This is where I want to build something," he said. She looked around. "Another greenhouse?" "No, a home. For us." Her breath caught. "Not a mansion. Just something simple. Our design. Our space. The farmhouse is perfect for now, but I want to build something that's fully ours." She stepped into the clearing, turning in a slow circle as the wind rustled the grass. "We'll plant fruit trees out front, and a wraparound porch, and a kitchen big enough for both of us." He nodded. "And a room with windows on every side, so we can watch the orchard change." She smiled. "Yes. Let's build it." They spent the rest of the summer sketching plans, choosing materials, and debating paint colors. But through it all, the foundation wasn't the concrete or the lumber, it was the quiet understanding that they were building a life, not just a house. When the first frost came, they stood hand in hand behind the new foundation, watching as the frame went up. Kellan kissed her cheek and whispered, "Next season, we'll start from here." And they did. The orchard yielded its largest harvest that fall. The cider sold faster than they could bottle it. The greenhouse bloomed through winter. The house rose, board by board, window by window, each nail a promise. And when spring came again, they moved into their home. The walls were warm wood. The floors creaked in places. The windows overlooked everything they'd built. And in the center of it all was a table Kellan had made where they sat each night, laughing, planning, living. Their love didn't fade or settle. It deepened, grew, like the orchard, like the land. And every morning when the sun crept over the horizon and painted the fields gold, Gwen would turn to Kellan, still warm beside her, and whisper the same thing. "We're home." And he'd always say, "We always were."